Welcome to Soul Talk Tuesday. I'm so glad to have you all with us again tonight. We have in the room, I love this because we're not really in the same room, but it seems like we're in the room. We have in the room an old friend tonight, not even just an old friend of mine, but an old friend of many of you, of many of yours. One of your, what's the grammatical right way to say this? An old friend of many of you. Amy Gillespie was a member of Unity Spiritual Center in the Rockies, our home congregation, and has gone out into the world for years, exploring and leaving our continent to go change lives in other places, and just done a lot. Amy, you've done a lot. It's interesting I was trying to think how long I've known you. And I have known you since before I started as the minister at Unity Spiritual Center, which was the end of 2010. And since you were traveling down into Mozambique. So at the end of that, so what is that?
So I came back from Mozambique in the end of May in 2010. So we must have met just before I got back and got to know each other. And it was around that time, for the next couple of years, that I was also traveling in and out of Guatemala, also doing survival skills for kids down there, recreating the programs. So I think that's about the time that we really got to know each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. So for the people who are here, and we have several who have not met you, would you take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So my name's Amy Gillespie, as Ariana said, and I grew up in the Midwest on a farm. I was adopted and grew up on a lovely corn and soybeans, cows farm. Very simple life, very community driven, and K through 12 in the same building. And went through a number of careers, including being a disaster relief insurance adjuster for many, many years, when I got a calling to go to Africa. And it was along my spiritual journey, actually at Unity in the Rockies, where I started meditating more, and then eventually was taking messages, all while working corporate USA 9 to 5. And found myself with this message: you must help the children of darkness. And, I was like, this is so weird. What am I going to do with this? How do I tell my parents about this? And, but one night I said, okay, God, you obviously are trying to get my attention. You want me to go somewhere. If you have something you want me to do, then please, give me a big billboard, right? Give me something. And I think within a week, I had 3 people come up with, well, first I picked up the paper and saw about the whole HIV/AIDS situation in Africa, but more than that, how many orphans were there, and how many orphans were dying just from simple accidents like being hit by a car. And so I wound up going to Mozambique and teaching survival skills training for kids for 6 years. And it started off as a 6-month tour that turned into a 6-year lifetime, really. Very unexpected. I was probably the last person you would have ever found in Africa. Maybe not the last, but I always figured if I was going to Africa, I'd be on safari.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you were down there. You did some great work while you were down there. And then I remember that you had also moved into Guatemala. What took you there?
So one of the donors that I was working with in Mozambique, he had projects in Guatemala, and he wanted to know if we could replicate the survival skills training programs that I made in Guatemala, and also to do a little bit of administrative checking on his funds and the organizations he was funding, and were they using money appropriately, and were the funds reaching the people they were supposed to be. And so that's what kind of took me in and out of Guatemala. In fact, I was invited to the National Palace, which is like the White House, on 12/12/12, as part of my journey and my work down there. But due to some corruption issues, I found myself flying back early and right back into Colorado Springs, Woodland Park, actually, on like 12/7/12. So one of those, again, life-changing, life-altering moments.
Well, right. And talk about a journey. I mean, you were in Africa, you were in Guatemala, you came back here, you were back at Unity for a while. In fact, you were leading our Unitine group. My son was in that class.
Yeah.
Loved you. You were his favorite teacher.
I loved my kids there.
Left. I was trying to think the last time I saw you in person was at Charlene Hanson's wedding.
Yes.
And when we were doing the wedding, you were working at Royal Gorge.
Yes. Yes. And I was the assistant general manager there. I was doing system performance, making sure the gondolas go on time and people get on and off of the sky coaster safely. And in the end, I was project managing rebuilding their water treatment facility. And so they have a completely new water filtration treatment facility that brings the water up from the Arkansas River and process it for the park use. And that was most of that I did while in Colorado. And then after I moved to Virginia, I continued to consult from a distance back to them. So that was kind of my last handoff in corporate world.
Yeah. So, and then you wrote some books.
I wrote some books.
All of that. And you were taking classes in iridology. And so talk a little bit about what traditional iridology is.
So I studied with 4 different modalities that were not true iridology. They were sort of out branches, although a couple of them do still teach with the International Iridology Association. So one was behavioral iridology with Jim Burgess. Another was biooptic holography. And I also studied the RAID system with Denny Johnson and a couple of other online courses. And iridology typically, in its truest essence, was formed from the idea that when people have illnesses or conditions or imbalances in their body, that those things are revealed in the eyes. That when you look at the eyes, you can see if someone has an intestinal problem or a heart problem. And the people that I studied with had left the traditional iridology because they felt like it was a little negative. They were always finding what was wrong with somebody, what was wrong. It was like, here's your symptom checklist. This little mark means you've got this or this or this. And so they had all gone beyond iridology to another tier of it or another layer of it. And so as I studied with them, I still was seeing things, for example, like that people would have markings in the area of sibling rivalry. And I'd be like, well, then how does that work if they're the oldest sibling? I mean, are they born with one mark in their eye? And then does it change each time they get a new sibling? And then if a sibling dies, does it change back? I mean, I was like, what if you got like 12 siblings? It's a really small space. I was like, something here, I feel like something's missing. What they're doing is beautiful, wonderful eye readings. But I felt like there was some part of it that was not in their work, that there was some piece of work missing.
Yeah. So it's interesting, the idea of looking at the iris and seeing the marks in the eye. And I've worked with Heidi North, who who's an amazing healer.
Wonderful.
Uses the eyes to really tell you. In fact, I think the first time you looked in my eyes, I used pictures that Heidi had taken. But there's a kind of something similar even to the ideas of reflexology. Like in the foot or in the hand, there are points that have an impact on the entire being, on the entire body. So there's a correlation, meaning the body is one whole unit, and whatever is going on is, you can find it and feel it in your hands, you can find it and feel it and work on it in your feet, or you can see it in your eyes. These different things, really quite an amazing, just as that, it's really quite amazing to think about the intelligence of the whole being and that everything is reflected there. So I had you tell your story because you are not a woo-woo girl. You are very grounded and very feet on the, feet on the floor, able to do the most practical things. And here you are doing this interesting thing, this very interesting thing. You're finding ancestors in people's eyes. So
There's that.
tell us.
Okay, so as you were saying, my journey started with these people who had branched into a new level of iridology, and the new international iridology associations, they are also now transforming some of the early works and saying some of that isn't the whole picture. Let's look at some new aspects of it. So what happened is I studied, as I said, with these gentlemen about methods of reading the eyes. And then I would say, but wait a minute, if somebody has an indicator in sexual trauma, what is that? Is that on their checklist? Is that something that's on their soul path? Something that's going to happen to them? And then again, with siblings, well, what if they don't have any siblings, but they have markings in sibling rivalry? What else don't we know that's in here? What else don't we know? And so my work really started and is still discovery and creating the map of ancestors. So as I got to Denny Johnson's work at Rayed, he was working with grandparents and great-grandparents. And that's when I realized it's not our sexual trauma, it's our ancestors' situation of sexual trauma that is imprinted in our eyes. It's their situation of sibling rivalry, or a female competitive environment, or a male competitive environment, or a creative competitive environment. And so it was really all about the interpretation. It was really all about, wait a second, what else is in here? So whereas iridology will sometimes look at 6 o'clock in the eyes and look at that as an issue with kidneys, in my work, 6 o'clock in the eyes is a gift for writing. If it's in the left eye, it's creative writing, children's, historical, narrative, more creative writing. In the right eye, it's business writing, the tech stuff. It's the business reports, the science, and those kinds of things. But also just outside of that is in each eye is an area for impatience. And there's where you find a lot of times where someone has signed a document too soon. And here's where we start getting into ancestral touch points. So here's how it works. I'll give you an example. Your child wants to go to camp. And so you sign the permission slip. And you're kind of thinking, I don't know, it seems like there's something else we have going on that weekend. There's something, I just can't put my finger on it, but they keep pushing, you got to sign that permission slip. I got to get it into school. And finally you sign it. And then a week later, you remember that it's your brother's wedding. And now you've got a snag, right? And you're like, I knew it. When you get to that, do you feel that in your third chakra just now? Like gut feeling, oh, darn it. Darn it. Why did I sign that? Why didn't I wait? That's when you are having an ancestral touch point with your ancestors' experience of signing something that they regretted later. Signing something too soon. It may have been a contract. It may have been, and the other markers in your eye will help see what it was. But for me, you can really get specific. People start telling me their stories. You know those people who are always in car accidents, rear-ended. Not their fault. Someone else hit them, cost them their job. You know the stories. These people that have these situations over and over. And what do they say? What's wrong with me? Why me? It's not. It's their ancestors' situation coming up in their life for that moment of, ooh, why did I sign that? And that's the opportunity for healing. That's the opportunity to say, I'm not in 1800s. I can get online. I can do this, I can do that. So now during COVID, look how many people are having the situations of their ancestors where things that never happened in America are suddenly happening. Bare shelves, can't visit a relative in the hospital, afraid to have a baby in a hospital. Things that never happened in the States that suddenly are happening to people. And these are great opportunities to say, wait a minute, which ancestor may have had this situation? How can I make this a 2020 moment we're not really completely separated. We have online, we have Zoom, right? How can I heal this opportunity? How can I heal this and not re-energize it? Because that's what happens, right? We get in that third chakra moment. Oh my God, I forgot it was his wedding. He's going to hate me. The feud's going to start. All this stuff's going to get re-energized and reloaded. And then what? Your great grandkids are going to have that moment of saying, oh, why did I sign that? Only now it's a college agreement. I took the wrong college, right? Or whatever it is that I took that I wish I hadn't. And so that's kind of how those ancestral touch points happen.
So when you were first studying, how did this unveil itself for you? How did that happen? Because
Well,
that's who's doing this, right? I don't know anybody else who's, I mean, this is very unique to you, Amy.
Yeah, this one's mine. This one's mine. So it started, as I said, with kind of like the sibling stuff and the sexual trauma stuff. And I was like, wait a minute. What am I looking at? What am I looking at? So I did a study actually with Boys and Girls Club there in Canyon City, comparing, we did a blind study, no pun intended, where we had each child filled out a profile, and someone else took their eye pictures, and someone else administered them a gifts and abilities test. And so we took all the information back, and it was well over 95% that children who had rings of achievement scored achievement on their Clifton StrengthsFinder test. Children who had focus ring, skilled, or were rated with focus as one of their top 5 vocational skills. So now suddenly it was kind of analytical. It was kind of that brain side of it. So then I kind of started working with the map. I was like, well, what would sibling rivalry be for my ancestors? What would patriarch issues be? What would matriarch issues? And then of course I had my own eyes. And of course that's where we can do the best comparison, because we really know our own stuff. Except in my case, I'm adopted. So I didn't know my stuff. Now I knew my birth mothers because I met her when I was 19, but I didn't meet my birth father till last year. And so it was really a wonderful opportunity to start comparing my stories to what my ancestors had going on. And really the timing could not have been more classic for meeting my father, and now, unveiling some of what is his history and his family history to some of the markings that are in my eyes.
Can you show us some of that?
I think so. All right, so let's take a peek at my eyes. For those of you who know me, you know that, let's share. You know that I have 2 different colored eyes. So for starters, if you can see me on screen, you cannot see those eyes just looking at me on screen. It's what you see is you might see a blue and brown. Some people have worked with me many years without noticing that I have 2 totally different colored eyes. So we talked about a gift for writing at 6 o'clock, for creative writing, for business writing, technical writing. Another thing that I discovered is when the pupils have this kind of grape or egg shape, when they're kind of oval, you see how my pupil isn't really round? This is where there's been an early trauma, where there has been a high impact trauma. It does not mean someone's been abused. So I'm always very cautious to say this does not mean that somebody beat me up. It just means that there was a high impact trauma. And what I find is when our ancestors have had high impact traumas, we typically will have the same. This is where we kind of think we're going to be killed. This is beyond what? Like our parents getting divorced and mom or dad leaves. This is where we're terrified in a moment. And the thing is, it's preconscious memory. The pupil shape is in there by age 2 or 3. And it really doesn't change. And so this will either be, because this is my left eye, this would either be where, pardon me, this would be either where it was involving a female, or it would be where a woman was the first person I saw afterwards. So in my case, I didn't discover this until I was in my 40s. But as an infant, when I was riding in the car, the boys got a hold of a pistol in the back seat and fired it. And it ricocheted off my baby seat and went into the arm of the man sitting next to me. Now, we grew up in a town of 270 people, K through 12 in one building. We never heard this story. I asked my brother, and he didn't remember the story either. He'd never been told it. But when my grandma died, she had a scrapbook, and in there was a little article about it. So oftentimes when I'm doing a reading at a show, like I just had one in Bluffton, South Carolina, and I told this gal, I was like, well, you had some kind of high impact trauma, something involving a female. This does not mean abuse, but some kind of high impact trauma involving a female. You won't remember it, but your cells will. This is prior to age 2 or 3. And she's like, no, there's not anything. I don't know of anything. Well, she came back to my Savannah show and said, wow, Amy, I went home and asked my mom, hey, what happened to me before I was 2 or 3 years old? And her mom said, well, you were just little, maybe 6, 10 months old, and your brother was running with you in his arms, and he fell down. His sister, your sister was chasing him, and he fell, and it knocked you out cold. And you were at your grandma's house, and so they went to the hospital, and the hospital was like 10 minutes away, and you were still knocked out cold. They could not get you back. And it was finally the nurse at the hospital who brought you to, who shook you or whatever and got you to come back. And that imprint was in her eye, but she never remembered the story. It was just completely gone.
That's amazing.
Isn't that wild? So, and this, I have kind of a really bizarre example of this because it's so different from my brown. But when the dominant eye splashes over into the non-dominant between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, this is where someone's made a hard shift from being very left brain to very right brained, or very right brain to very left brain. If it's before age 2, they tend to take the mother's facial features. If it's after age 2, they'll take the father's. So like I said, this is kind of an extreme example, but this would be the same if we were looking at your eyes or your son's or anyone who has the same colored eyes. So pretty fascinating, huh?
It's really fascinating. Now, you and I had this great conversation in January of last year when you started really putting your energy at this, and you already had my eyes. So you sent me a reading. And it was amazing to just listen, to just see. I was like, how did you get that out of there? How do you see that in there? But having looked at it since and looking at your eyes, it's almost easier, I think, looking at your eyes than it was at my eyes, because I'm objective, right? So I have a different perception when I'm looking in your eyes. So in my eyes, you actually saw ancestors. Like you were able to show me where they were and how they were facing and what you were seeing. Can you do that in your eyes?
So do you see the woman here? She's got either short hair or it's pulled back. She's younger because it's shiny. This is a part in her hair on the right side. And she's like looking over her shoulder, kind of like, those black and white graduation pictures. She's got black cap sleeves and an open collar line. So she's looking over her right shoulder. And let me see, I don't know if I can make her, if I make her bigger, she's going to pixelate. But here's the part in her hair. Here's the left side of her face, the right, her ear. Here's her neckline. Here's that black cap sleeve. And you see the man's face here? He's thinking, like he's got his hand on his chin thinking about something. And I think my other blue does a better job here. So this is the difference between photos. This is where you're looking at the eye. This is the same eye. This is my blue. But this is where someone's put light all on the front of it. So what you're seeing is like a flat picture. With this, you're lighting from the side. And now you can see the depth of these markings, which you don't see over here. This is quite flat. But you've got a gal who's blonde right here. Here's her face, looking over towards the right. Blonde hair down the side here. Right in there. And someone here, and here, and here. Now the thing is, when you're looking at images, let me give you an image that'll be a little bit easier for you. Oh, I can do this. Do you see? Here's her hair pulled back into a soft bun. Her forehead, a little button nose. Her chin. And the big Japanese bow on back. Although she told me it was her great-grandmother carrying her baby on back up to the family farm in the mountains after her husband had died.
Interesting.
This, let me come. I'm going to take you out and back, but let me bring you back here. And here. Do you see this face here?
Yeah, I see something.
So let me bring it up. His right eye, his left, his nose, mustache, chin. And I think these are all on my website as well. I should probably stop my cursor so you can actually look.
Amazing. So when you see people in someone's eye,
yeah,
you get some insight into who they are or why they're there, or you're just able to identify that they're in someone's eye?
a little bit of both, because oftentimes there will be clues there. You'll see someone wearing ballet slippers. You'll see someone like this man here. There's like a shadow on the left side of his nose. And if you zoom in, you'll see it's actually a man in a dark jacket with light slacks and black shoes walking that direction, walking away. And he was so clear on the back of my camera that people 4 tables over were like, oh my God, there's a man in her eye. And I said, well, there's a man in everybody's eye. You'd be hard pressed to look at eyes and not have images in there of people. In this case, she knew. She said it was a great grandfather she had always felt close with, who had, she had just been by the place where he had died the night before. And she had just always felt close to him, and he just chose to drop in. Now, to some extent, when I'm doing eye readings, I'm looking at things like, are they showing me the left side or the right side? Are they showing me, are they showing a full body? Are they showing just a face? So sometimes it might not even be a full image. It might just be that it's something representative, right? So where you're kind of seeing some part of who or what they were, what their life was about. You know what I'm saying? So it's pretty fascinating work. And then sometimes they wind up being almost ghosty. Now, I don't know that you'll see this little girl, but she's in a white dress with like bobby socks and her hair pulled into like 2 little piggy tails alongside here. So it's much like if you think about looking at a photograph of like the Titanic, and there's 300 people standing on there, or one of the ships of Navy guys going off to sea, and there's a tiny person, and you try to zoom in and they're gone, right? But in their small size, you really catch like, oh, there's Grandma and Grandpa sitting on the bow because I remember her blue lapel, but you really can't see the details. Sometimes they're very detailed and sometimes they're quite faint, but it's always amazing, you know? And sometimes I'm quite sure we're seeing maybe people who have never been photographed because maybe they were infants. Maybe it was in a time before cameras, before photographs, and you're catching their image for the first time. And so, but the one thing that I think is really, I want to make sure that we cover is that, we talked about these ancestral touch points where we have, you're not listening to me, right? Know that one? You're not listening to me. You can't hear me, right? So when we're in those touch points, we don't necessarily need a photo of our eyes. We can have that touch point opportunity with our ancestor just by recognizing, oh my gosh, I am in an ancestral moment. And the more weird it is, the more strange or unique to you, the more it's ancestral. The more it's a repeat pattern happening over and over, the more it's ancestral. And if it happened to you before 7 or 8 years old, it's ancestral. It's their situation coming up in your life to say, it's like our own personal evolution and the evolution of our genetic line. So many times I work with people who are experiencing judgment due to gender identity. Almost every time they have markings in religious oppression.
Oh, that's
maybe they have ancestors who were not allowed to marry because one was Catholic and one was Lutheran, because one was Irish and one was Italian. Mm-hmm. And now they're not allowed to marry because they're same sex, right? Every time. I can now start drawing people's eyes just by hearing their story. So I think that part's important. And I have a video on my YouTube channel about reach out to your ancestors. Start recognizing when you're in the heat of an ancestral moment that is really not about you. It's just an opportunity to say, is this still an issue for us? So we get locked in and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm locked in. Let me out, let me out, let me out. Oh, wait a minute. It's 2020. I have a cell phone. Hey, can you come get me out? The door's shut and I'm stuck in here. We're in a different world. And so some of the traumas of our ancestors are fading out. They don't bleed people anymore. They don't guillotine people anymore. But some teenagers bleed themselves. And so this is where, and particularly the in utero impressions, that's probably been some of my most heartfelt work, where, it imprints on the eye the mother and the father's experience of their pregnancy with the child. So, for example, I just did a reading for a gal in Virginia Beach, and she came back to me, I think about a month later, and said, Amy, did I ever tell you how healing that reading was? And I said, oh, I think so, And she said, no, she said, really? She said, you asked me what happened at 10 weeks of my mom's pregnancy with me. And I said, well, I don't know, I'll ask my mom. And you said, go easy, go gentle. A lot of times these stories have never been discussed. They've certainly never been healed, and they're usually emotional. And she said she asked her mom, and her mom said, when I was 10 weeks pregnant, I left your father because he wanted me to abort you. And she said, I never knew it. And people always ask me why I didn't get along with my dad, why I was never close to my dad. And she was like, yeah, my dad's okay. He's a nice guy. I like him. But there was never that tight bond. And she never really knew why. Nobody knew why. And it was the first time the conversation happened. So a lot of times the eyes are what opens the conversation. Like you said, it's like cutting into a tree.
Right. So interesting. Just to consider that we have record of things built into our physiology that we don't even know about, that we,
right.
But as you're talking about ancestors and you're talking about healing, I think one of the interesting points to me is that there is this epigenetic line that we carry. Mm-hmm. We carry real memories. We are impacted by those ancestors who came before us. If your ancestor got eaten by a bear, you might be afraid of bears and not know why.
Exactly right.
And they say 11 generations back. We have epigenetic signatures from 11 generations. So in the picture of oneness, that we're all interconnected, it's kind of interesting to me to think about the fact that it's not just horizontal. In other words, it's not just across this lifetime. We are connected in the oneness that goes beyond time,
Right.
all the way back through our ancestral lines and across dimensions and things that, you know, are planes of existence that we don't think about.
Right.
So there's an opportunity for us, not only in seeing what's in our eye, but more importantly, in order to benefit from what you're talking about, to recognize that part of your work here in this lifetime may be to heal an epigenetic signature that was a wound carried by an ancestor.
Yes.
So knowing, you know, in knowing that in America, most of us can go back about, we can actually name our ancestors maybe 3 generations, right? It's
Right.
amazing if you find somebody who can go 4 or 5 generations. I wonder if there's more that you do that helps people to kind of, I don't know, excavate that ancestral heritage.
Yeah. So of course I work with adopted people quite often. And one clue, you know, you were saying, well, what about these images? Oftentimes there will be someone from behind. So you'll see back of a head, shoulders, you'll see an image that's from behind. That's someone unknown. That's where there's some missing relatives. And like I had a gal in Kentucky who left her reading, this is not, you know how they say this is not typical result, you know, like from the diet thing or whatever. She found 5 aunts she didn't know she had. And so it's, and working with people who are adopted, it just really, it's amazing how much you can fill in their blanks, because if it happened to you, it happened to them. And so you get these clues. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, so talk about that, because you had some similar experience with that, some personal experience in finding your father.
Yeah. Yeah. So my mother, I met my birth mother when I was 19, and I met my birth father last year in Denver at the International New Age Trade Show. The timing just happened to work out. We'd been in touch over years, but had never met, and we finally met. And so doing this work, what I've found, I mean, in some ways it's been such a gift to be adopted and not know my background, because as I work with people, like, if you're interested in it, your ancestors were in it. If you're someone who does needlepoint and cross stitch, you'll find milliners in your ancestry.com. You'll find people who were doing sewing work, hand sewing work. I read eyes for a hairstylist who she's like does the makeup and hair of the stars, you know, like backstage for movies. And her ancestors have been styling hair for like over 400 years. I'm like, who would even think of that? You would never think of, when you go to your hairstylist, that maybe their heritage goes back to 400 years of build-on training. So my birth father and I, we just met briefly due to timing. And so we're talking, and he's asking me all the questions about my eye work. And he had done actually biometrics with irises in the military, like in the 60s. He was in computers in the 60s. And he's like, give me fingerprints. I was like, give me eyeballs. I mean, I was like, we're like a couple of genetic anomalies, right? But even so, in the clues, so his mother was a Gordon from Scotland. And if you look up the Gordon heritage in Scotland, their first castle was Huntley Castle. My fiance and I just bought a farm in Virginia that's a Huntley farm. It's on Huntley land. And we didn't know this when we bought it. But there's this easement. You want to talk, here's an ancestral moment. There's this easement that seems to be like this big ordeal in the county. Like everybody talks about the easement, like a moat around a castle, right? And it's that way all over the place. My birth mother and I worked for the same company at the same time in our lives, probably sat at the same desk when we were 18 years old in Burnsville, Minnesota. My birth father went to college when my adopted mom was back in college at the same college. We probably bumped into each other at Musicland in the mall, unbeknownst to each other. And so these genetic ties are unreal. The one thing I found is that when you start doing this healing work for yourself, because that's really what you're doing, it's vicarious that it travels to your ancestors. But as you do this work for yourself, suddenly you'll find people around you who you have absolutely no way of thinking you would be related to these people, especially people who annoy you, right? But suddenly you find that people who haven't talked to you in years are suddenly like your best friend. All of a sudden this healing starts sort of rippling out, because as you catch that ancestor from 1489 who was locked in an ice house, it's trickling down to all of their progeny, catching everyone down the line as you heal it and go, being locked in is not an issue. We got a cell phone. I can FaceTime. I'm not cut off from the world. I can't buy a wedding dress in person. I can just imagine, because I am off of the line of Queen Elizabeth, who they tried to poison with a dress. I can't, right? So I can't try on a wedding dress, but I can go online. We're in a new time. We're in a new time. So excavation, just quick, I want to hit one real deep excavation, again, back to time in utero. Oftentimes when people have a marking that their parents had like that, oh my God, I hope we're not pregnant, the next morning, right? Like, oh my God, about last night. It's either about last night or it's about the relationship. So the parents' experience of the pregnancy shows up in the eyes. So if they found out when they were 4 weeks pregnant, you'll see a little mark there at about 4 weeks of pregnancy. If they woke up going, oh my gosh, I hope we're not pregnant, then the baby is usually imprinted at a cellular level of not being wanted. At a cellular level of, I hope you're not having Susie. I hope you're not having whoever. And so I was at a holistic fair with a gentleman. He was a retired Navy admiral, and I was explaining this to him. And bless his heart, the tears just started running down his face. And he said, I said, they cannot hear I love you, because every time you say I love you, they hear the words, but their intuition, their every cell says, no, you don't, you didn't want me. Even if they've never ever been told that. Even if they've never ever been shown that, because by the time they were born, you were like, look at this baby, I love this baby, right? But because that initial reaction was, oh no, right? That it imprints. And just knowing the rest of the story is enough to start the healing. And so here's this man, this retired man, and the tears were running down his face. And he said, our son took his life. And he said, I know. He said, we were in therapy for years and this never came up. And he says, I know without a doubt, if we had just had this conversation, he'd be here. We could not understand why he could not hear I love you from me. And I said, it happens in military babies a lot, because it's deployment. It's a weekend furlough. It does nothing about anything. It's just the timing. It's just like, oh my gosh, I hope not now. And so oftentimes that becomes just a really fracturing situation in the family, one that goes back many, many, many generations. You'll find it every 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 generations, going back for hundreds of years. Illegitimate children raised by an aunt or a grandma or an oldest sister. If it happened to you, it's back in the pack. You'll find it going back. And
so then I wonder what happens, because I agree that we tend to continue to work on the same issues that were up in our family. And some of those are really easy to see. As we look back, we can see, oh gosh, yeah, it might have skipped a generation, but my grandpa was certainly doing that, or my great working on that.
Inheritance. Mm-hmm. Right.
So then I wonder, it's my belief that when we heal those things, we then allow our children to go forward without having to do that level of work. What's your feeling on that?
I very much agree. I think it will come back and revisit, but if it's truly healed, it's not going to have the same emotional charge. And that's how you know how healed or unhealed it is how much it's firing you up. You know, if it's something that just pushes all your buttons, it's still on board. And what you can watch for is the dynamics. It's the dynamics that will repeat. So your ancestor gets locked in an ice house. You get locked in the stairwell of the 23rd floor of the Hilton at a wedding. Did you ignore the sign on the door? Did you think for just a second before you went through it, oh, I should? You know what I mean? It's look to the dynamics, because it's the dynamics that are the part that's available for healing. How did you get yourself into this situation again? Oh, I knew it. I knew I should have turned left. Did you not listen to yourself? Did you let someone take your willpower and let them talk you into turning right when you knew it was left? What are the dynamics of how you got there? That's why you're doing it over and over, because you haven't got to the root. You've cut the weed off. You haven't pulled the root out.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting to look across faith traditions and think about this. One of the things that I admire in Judaism is that they have a prayer process for forgiveness that extends to the ancestors. Mm-hmm. That is about not just forgiving your ancestors, but asking forgiveness of the failings or hurts that are imposed by a grandparent. And so this whole process of remembering we're connected to a bloodline, remembering that we carry something from that bloodline,
right.
That the things that we're working on in this lifetime are not necessarily just the things that are part of our own lives, right. But that we are actually doing work for our ancestors. And that, makes it really important to know a little bit about where you came from, if you can figure that out. Right. I think it's fascinating, Amy, that because you didn't have access to all of that information, that so much has come for you through this particular modality.
Right. And born to become.
Yeah. And what a gift you must be to people who have been adopted, mm-hmm. And are looking for that message.
Yeah. It's really sacred work. Oftentimes I'll be at a fair or something, and it'll just call to me someone that I'm supposed to read, that without charging, a child, a whatever, there's something that comes up. And I had a gal in I guess it was in Savannah, Georgia, who came up, and she was adopted, but there was a marking in her eye that really indicated that her father did not want to give her up. That it was for whatever reason, it just whatever, ancestral, right? But I mean, for whatever reason. And she said, she said, my grandma knew who my birth parents were, and she did mention that at one time. And so, like you say, we come back to heal and to heal and to heal. And yeah, it's nice that if I can pull my own dynamics, I can pull theirs. But half the time you can look in those eyes and see them in there. You're like, there's the French Legionnaire, there's the shaman, there's the woman in a trapeze outfit. And you can really start seeing some of their story and some of their lives. And that part is just really exciting. You never know what's going to show up in there. They're so beautiful, like an entire universe in there.
I love that. And I love the conversation we're having about ancestors. A lot of cultures really, they take ancestor, to revere the ancestor, very seriously. And in our country, as I said, because many of us, unless you are native to this land, you came here as an immigrant family. A lot of times immigrant families lost their surnames. They were given a name that was even more easy to pronounce, or they chose a different name in order to make separation from
12 o'clock, right eye.
Right?
12 o'clock, right eye.
Really?
Yeah.
So, you go through this and here you are with each of us with things that show up in our lives over and over, issues that we're working to resolve over and over, that we say to ourselves, why am I doing this? Why can I not figure this out? Well, part of the reason is, like you were saying, you don't have the root story. So if you're able to, remembering that the words that we use and the intentions that we use for healing are really important. If you're able to say in your healing process and to kind of internalize, as I heal myself, I heal my ancestral line. As I confront this issue, I allow anything to come up that needs to be healed, and I don't have to know where it came from. I'm here to do this work, and I willingly do this. My Hopi teacher would say, as willing sacrifice. And he always explained to us that the word sacrifice means to make sacred. So I do this work, this connecting with my ancestors, this healing beyond me, in willing sacrifice to make sacred the experiences that happened to those who gave me life, those whose bloodline flows through me. So it's powerful work. It's this whole ancestral connection is really powerful and very valuable work. And remembering that we are not just a horizontal species. It's not just everyone that's alive right now that we're connected to, but that we are connected to those that came before us. I wonder if, because I believe that you are not only connected to those that came before you, but that you're already connected to those that come after you. So I wonder if you ever see anything forward in the eye.
So just to touch point on what you just said, one thing that each of us has an opportunity to remember is that we are the only representative of the exact ancestors that we're carrying. Even if you're identical twins, you're attached to different ancestors. And so this is why siblings are so different and why the traumas that come up in their lives are so different. So when you do something great, you're doing their great, right? When you say, I knew it, it's like their words are coming through you in their accent, in their dialogue, in their foreign words. It's coming right through you. When I see patterns, so women are born with their ovaries intact. So when I'm born, I've been through my grandmother's life and my mother's life. You know, I've been through their experiences. So if they had an altercation with a clown, I may have a thing about clowns without having any reason why. So do I see forward? The only way I would say that I do is, of course, the inherent gifts travel forward. And so, of course, the traumas do as well. So if it's a sharp marking, the one thing is when people have what I call a postage stamp, you know, people have sometimes brown flecks in their eyes or brown spots or, you know, little things. If they have what I call a postage stamp, which is like a square mark, a square brown spot, or it looks rectangular or anything like that, that is where the pattern is like nearly done. It's like a scab. If you wash it gently, it'll come off and the skin might be a little fresh, but it's going to be fine. If you pick at it, it's going to bleed and pass down. So if you've got a postage stamp that's like almost done, that's really that tipping point on healing, right? And that's oftentimes where kids get adopted because they get taken out of the genetic and environment to just the environment.
Interesting.
Trajectory change on a pattern.
Amy, it's such an interesting thing to talk to you. It's always a blast anyway, but it's so interesting to talk about this and to kind of, I hope, inspire people to look more seriously at their ancestral line, to consider what you know, consider where your ancestors came from, consider what challenges you know that they have faced. Consider the patterns in your family that show up more than one time and pay attention to that. I think there's tremendous wisdom there. If somebody wants to reach out to you and talk to you about this and have you take a look at their eyes, what's the process?
The best bet is to go to my website, which is irrigenics.com. I don't know if I can read Irrigenics behind me. But I think we'll have a link up later on the Zoom. And they can, we can do a reading. Also, I'm really excited because I'm just finishing up my first group of trainees who are getting certified in Aerogenics ancestral eye reading. And let me tell you, I respect all teachers who've had to do online teaching. Creating over 500 slides of information for people to be able to do what I do has been arduous, but so rewarding, so exciting. I can't be everywhere. And so I need to hand this information off. I need to hand it through. And so if someone's interested in learning how to do ancestral eye reading, or if they're interested in a reading, aerogenics.com is the best. They can reach me at aerogenics@gmail or amy@aerogenics.com.
And how do you get somebody's picture when you can't take it yourself?
I have a video on YouTube, and it's a little dark. Like we didn't have good lighting that night. So it's a little dark, but it's really, really good information on how to light your eye from the side. Have someone help you, but how to actually get your eye photo and send it over to me, and so that I can read from a picture. And I do that quite often. The quality of the picture will determine how long I can read. If I have a picture that's not a super great quality, I might be able to, or the pixels aren't quite right, I might only be able to read 20 minutes. But if I've got a sharp picture, I could go all day.
Awesome. So I know on this call there are people who haven't seen you in a couple years, and lots of people who are just meeting you, but also some old friends. So tell us what's going on in your life.
In my life. Well, I'm getting married. Dan and I will be getting married the end of October, and we're so excited about that. And I'm in Virginia. We just bought a farm, as I said, a Huntley farm, about an hour north of Richmond, where we have pecans and pears and peaches and all of that. And with starting to teach people how to do what I do, I'm really hoping to be able to get much more back to working with kids and doing the research side of this, more development of the map and what else is in there. And so that's a really exciting thing coming up. And I am going to be in Colorado, BTW. I'm going to be at the Body Mind Spirit Expo, which they just changed it today. So you are the first in line for this information. It's moved from the Denver Merchandise Mart to the Crown Plaza, to the convention center where the International New Age Trade Show was last year. And so it's actually going to be now September 25th to 27th. So they changed the date and location just today in order to circumvent COVID. So I will be back in Colorado soon. So you can certainly come get a reading, and you can even purchase my iMag, which is a 36-page PDF personal eye reading that I do for people as well.
Nice. Very good. Sweetheart, I love you. I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy you're happy. I am thrilled about your upcoming ceremony, and it's just wonderful, the good work you're doing in the world, and important work, really important for people to give thought to this whole ancestral picture.
So
as far as to do the eye reading, or you just simply spend some time with this idea that you are connected to your ancestors, that part of your work here is to heal some of those things that are in your ancestral line. And it's been my experience that a willingness to do that, a willingness to allow the universe to reveal to you what is your good work, what is there for you to heal, that those things tend to come to you. The universe is pretty quick to respond. The universe as you know it, whatever name you want to attach to that
right.
quantum consciousness, that divine presence that guides us as we move through life. So I know that you're in great service to that divine presence, Amy, and I'm delighted to have had the time with you, and just thank you for making time to visit with us.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come. As you said, the ancestral part of this, I was not expecting it. I wasn't expecting to be reading eyes to start with, even if I do have brown and blue. But I certainly never expected to drop into this ancestral slot that has just taken on a life of its own and is really so sacred and important.
Well, thanks for being here.